You're watching Capital City Sunday.
Good morning. This week on Capital City Sunday, pro-Palestinian protests on college campuses nationwide are presenting a new challenge for President Joe Biden.
This week is anything of an indicator. There's a lot of deep emotions around this issue, and it's deep emotions, I would say, on both sides of the issue.
Political reporter Darielle Fair sits down with the president of Young Democrats of America to talk about how these protests impact President Biden's support among key voters for his campaign.
This is a bigger problem for Joe Biden than it is for Republicans.
And former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker joins the show. The issues he says college-age students are focused on and how they shape the Republican message.
Job isn't actually to win. Their job is to push forward issues that aren't being dealt with by the major candidates.
And as the presidential election draws near, independent candidate Robert F. Kennedy qualifies for the ballot in a key battleground state. A political science expert breaks down the impact of his third-party candidacy. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Sarah Massler-Donar. Some of the issues that will impact voter turnout at the polls this year taking center stage this week. Student protests over the war in Gaza captured global media attention. Protests began at New York's Columbia University, and students around the world took up the call. Many demonstrators calling on their schools to cut ties with Israel. Hundreds have been arrested across the nation, sometimes amid scuffles with police. And here in Wisconsin, the ongoing conflict in the Middle East has also struck a chord with students. On Thursday, UW-Madison's Students for Justice in Palestine held a panel where people gathered for a discussion with those personally impacted by the war. And student groups are planning a pro-Palestine rally for tomorrow morning. UW-Madison officials and police putting out this letter Friday saying not following campus protest policies and rules, quote, can and will have consequences both within our code of conduct and more broadly under Wisconsin law. Now, the war in Gaza is a challenge for the Biden administration as this more progressive bloc of voters demands the U.S. change its course on foreign policy in the Middle East. Political reporter Darielle Fair dives into how this issue impacts President Biden's campaign.
As young voters continue to show their dissatisfaction with the Biden administration's handling of the Israel-Hamas war, the president just approved more than $26 billion in security defense funds and humanitarian aid to Israel. Here with me now is Young Democrats of America President Quentin Wathum-Ocama. Quentin, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
The war in Gaza is clearly a major issue for this more progressive group of voters. Should President Biden be putting more of a focus on this issue on the campaign trail?
That's a great question. I think it's a really tough issue for the president. Young voters, millennial and Gen Z voters are really, I think, divided on this question. I know it's a tough question to deal with politically, and I think the president needs to continue to address it and bring it up as situations continue to arise with it. I do think it would be probably a mistake to make it a focal point of the campaign. It's just a really, really tough issue. The situation in Gaza and Israel right now is continuing, especially in light of the recent back and forth between Iran and Israel. It's really difficult and complicated. So I think the president just needs to be mindful of it, do his best to address issues as they come up, and it is definitely a challenge on the campaign trail.
And Quentin, to your point, you say that this issue should not be a focal point of the campaign. What do younger voters need to hear from the president right now?
I think young voters need to hear from the president right now that he is listening. We see all this energy with the protests on college campuses, protests in large urban settings. And this is not just a new thing. This has been going on now for weeks and months across the country in different scales. I think young voters just want to they want to feel like they're being heard. And I really think that the campaign, the administration, and the president can just communicate that, we may not necessarily see eye to eye on all these issues and the potential solutions, but that he is taking the concerns of young voters seriously. We've seen some shift in rhetoric from the president and the administration of the campaign, which I think is positive, but I think just listening. I think young voters want to be heard, and I think that's what we really need to see that communicated really effectively from the campaign and the administration. Because if this week is anything of an indicator, there's a lot of deep emotions around this issue, and it's deep emotions, I would say, on both sides of the issue. And I think something the president has always done well is to be somebody who has been a really compassionate listener. And I think that is that side of Biden that we need to see right now.
Now to an issue we've talked a lot about here on our show. The uninstructed vote is the civic engagement piece to these protests. Campaigns to vote uninstructed have taken place in Michigan, Wisconsin, and your home state of Minnesota. There's still a lot of time between now and the general election. A lot can still change, but where it stands right now, how do you think this effort might impact Biden's chances in November?
I would say that the uncommitted campaigns, the uninstructed campaigns, really were meant to send a message to the campaign, to the president, that something needs to change. I think it's great that people are using these Democratic primaries and have used this process to make their voice heard, instead of sitting on the couch and maybe choosing not to vote. By participating in a Democratic primary, even if you are voting for this uncommitted, I think it's a really strong force of and show of civic engagement. And I think moving forward, it's just how do we make sure that these folks who may have voted uncommitted in the primary in these various states, including my own, how do we make sure that they are coming to the table this fall, November, when we're really facing the threat from Donald Trump? So I think that is where that listening to those concerns of those voters, taking it seriously, having those conversations, even at a person-to-person level from the campaign, is going to go a long way in helping build back some of those bridges that may be floundering right now. But I think there's a lot of opportunity there as well. The election is a long ways off. There's a lot of opportunity to connect with those folks at a really personal level. I think there's a lot of work to do in making sure that those folks don't sit at home this fall or vote third party or something else along those lines.
Former President Donald Trump, during his presidency, implemented pro-Israel policies like recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the first and only president to take a stance on that foreign policy issue in the Middle East. If younger Democratic voters don't vote for President Biden over this issue, aren't they concerned that would potentially mean handing former President Donald Trump, a strong supporter of Israel, the White House?
I think there's absolutely legitimate concern about Donald Trump, his rhetoric, and his past actions. I think young voters, what you're seeing right now in terms of the uncommitted movement, in terms of what you're seeing in protests, is that folks really want to believe that by using their voice, by using their ballot, that they can maybe change the Joe Biden in the administration's policy moving forward. And I think that is really what it is. It's not we throw our hands up and say, let's have Trump have everything. I think it's a recognition that folks are not going to be able to influence Trump in the Republican Party. They're really, really clear, not just on this issue, but on many other issues of where they're at. And I think you're seeing this as a way to try to proactively create some movement within the Democratic Party, within the administration, to make some changes moving forward. So I don't think young people are naive to the fact that a Trump presidency has a lot of risks. I think that they're just using this moment to create a movement to create the changes that they want to see in policy moving forward. And I can't fault young people for doing that. I think you have to use your voice and all your tools available to see the policies you want enacted, even though sometimes that may mean having uncomfortable conversations with folks you consider friends and allies.
Quentin Wathum-Ocama, President of Young Democrats of America, we appreciate you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up, former Wisconsin Governor Scott Walker on his work to engage young voters, why he says criticism of the war in Gaza is a bigger issue for President Biden than it is for Republicans.